that expression, the mental load, it's a bit sort of Instagrammy, but I think it is true. I think it describes something very true where mothers are more likely to have that constantly running, I think one of my friends described is who has done a poo today, how recently, etc. Like that's the sort of thing. If you're looking after loads of little kids, that's the sort of thing you need to be having constantly running around in your mind. What am I going to make for dinner? Do I need your laundry? Whatever.
And that's an amazing thing because somebody has to be doing that, right? It's not it's
Yeah, someone has to be CEO of the home.
absolutely. And that's why I I sometimes try to explain to people that I don't call myself a feminist. And partly it's because I'm just not sure that speaking as if everyone should be equal with regard to responsibilities in the home is helpful. Because I think there has to be somebody in charge of what's happening, right? The home is no different than a company, uh, like an organization or a state. There has to be someone who's running the thing, and that's fine if sometimes that's the father and not the mother. I don't, but to ignore the fact that there has to be a CEO of the home, I think is not helpful. Like somebody has to be making the decision. Somebody has to be making sure that everything's happening the way it has to happen. And I think that's why I think the more I think that I maybe as growing up in a society that does try to be somewhat egalitarian in the sense that women do get educated and they do go out and work. Um, I'm not sure it's motivated by egalitarianism, but it looks egalitarian from the outside. I think that until I had my own children, I did kind of think that I could just ignore the fact that I'm a woman. You know, it's like not so important. I can do philosophy, even though there are very few women in philosophy, and I can be interested in the things I'm interested in, even though I always found that there were more men who were interested in it than I did, and that's fine. I realized that once the differences between men and women come out so much more once you're both obviously pregnant and giving birth, and but also when you're actually having children, and the more you want to have children, and the more having children is a big part of your life, and the more years, I mean, just think about it. Let's say it's like 5 children, right? That's pretty normal in Israel. So that's like what, 15 years, let's say, that's the one of the main things you're doing. You never really stop taking care of your children, but let's say at least 15 years, right? So the more time of your life you're spending on this, and this is a big part of your life, the more the differences become important. I mean, if I think if you just stay a college student forever, then yeah, then the differences between men and women, I think, at least the emotional and psychological ones, maybe you can sometimes brush them under the rug. I think that you're right. In the argument you're making in your book is that that's not beneficial, especially not to women, to sweep these differences under the rug. But let's say you did. But I think once you're having children, you're just exacerbating the differences. You're focusing on the differences. And I think the reason is because the building the home is a joint project, right? And you want the women's tendencies and the men's tendencies to come out as much as possible because they're building something together. I mean, I think if we're going to go back to Judaism, that's I think what basically is the Jewish view, is that what's most central to our lives are joint projects between men and women, right? So the
Mm.
family is something that a man and a woman do together. I mean, okay, so today there are other options, but I think that the most easy way to have children, at least, would be to have a man and a woman do it. And I think that the basic loyalties of life, the loyalty to your family, the loyalty to your nation, those are not loyalties to the people who are most like you, right? Because it could be that other women are most like me. It'll be most easy for me to understand the emotional struggles they're going through. It'll be most easy for me to get together with them and try to change the world with them because we kind of work in similar ways. But the main loyalties in Judaism are the projects that are joint to men and women, and not the ones where women are fighting for their own interests or men are fighting for their own interests. And that means that it's a loyalty to someone who is psychologically, sexually, biologically very different from you. And that means you both contribute different things, but it also means that you constantly have to be reevaluating because your perspective on things is just not the only perspective. And I think that's the model you find in the Bible in Genesis. I mean, so interesting to see that this is another reason why I don't like saying I'm a feminist, is because, how Mill just says, like all of history, women were subjugated to men. Now, it could be that that was true a lot of the time, a lot of places, but it's also true that in the biblical stories, I mean, the women have such strong opinions, right? So Sarah says, no, I mean, this other child that you've brought into first, it's her idea to bring another woman into the home in order to give a son to her husband, right? She suggests that because she's so embarrassed and horrified with her own inability to bring a child. And then she realized it was a complete mistake because she thinks, oh, I'll raise the child of this other woman and I'll be the respected mother. And then she realizes that no, it's not so easy to take somebody else's child and pretend that it's your own. I mean, this other woman is the one who's pregnant, who's heavy with child, and she's feeling so important. Hagar is feeling so important because she's the one who's doing the hard work of doing this incredible thing of bringing a child into the world. Fully so, she feels more important than Sarah. And then Sarah realizes that it's just, the son is following his mother. She can't just pretend that it's her child. And then she tells Abraham, I mean, you've wronged me. You've done this terrible thing to me. You've brought this other woman into the home, even though that was her own idea, right? Because it's not enough, the fact that it was her idea. She doesn't really want Abraham to just do whatever she says, right? Just obeying your spouse is not really what marriage is about. She wants Abraham to find a way for her to be respected in her home. And she also has an opinion about once she does have a son, when Isaac does come along, she says, look, this other son is not someone who I can raise my child with. He can't, the kind of education he's receiving, the upbringing he's receiving is not one that can be reconciled with the way I want to raise my child, and all that drama is because Abraham and Sarah are clearly partners, right? They are partners not just in physically bringing the child into the world, but because Sarah's opinion really counts and Abraham respecting her really matters, so much so that God intervenes and he says, whatever Sarah says, you should do, right? So I don't want to pretend that this is an egalitarian, equal family. It's clear that Abraham is the one who hears God's voice and Sarah does not hear God's voice in the story, right? So I don't think we need to pretend that it's whatever modern ideal of equal marriage is. It's not. Abraham's the one in the end who makes the decisions. He's the one who's bringing people into the home. He's the one who hears God's voice. But it's also not Sarah just does whatever Abraham says, or even Sarah does whatever Abraham said God said, right? She has very strong opinions about who is going to be a part of the family and who's not going to be a part of the family, the way the children are going to be raised. And those opinions, especially when she's right, God comes out on her side. And you see this throughout. I mean, it's the same with Rebecca. She realizes that Isaac prefers the older son, but she knows the qualities of her sons and she knows that he's mistaken. And this is not the son who will continue him. And she can't talk to Isaac. She doesn't think he's open to hear. So she tricks him, which is not ideal marriage. I think definitely we're supposed to think that Sarah and Abraham's fighting things out is better than Rebecca tricking Isaac. But still, it's clear that the story thinks that she's right because ultimately the son that she dislikes is the one who wants to kill his brother, right? He's not a particularly moral character. So I think that there's another model, rather than just thinking that relationships between men and women have to be relationships that are completely equal. There could be a model where people are CEOs of different things, right? It could be that the mother is the CEO of what's happening in the house. And that's good that there's somebody who's actually running the home and is figuring out and is on top of all the details that it takes. But regardless of who's making the decisions, regardless if it's the father or the mother, or the man or the woman, there has to also be a model where both have input, both have opinions, both have perspectives, because they're going to have different perspectives. And those perspectives need to be hashed out. They need to be worked out in some way. And so I think the biblical view is more about creating that kind of a system where you have these different views hashed out in the family arena, rather than having all the women getting together and fighting for their own rights in the public sphere, or all the men saying, look, we're just better off having the women subjugated, right? Like neither one of those seem to be describing what's happening in these stories.